It always starts the same way. A new idea, a life-changing opportunity, and then everyone starts talking about it. Your coworker just invested. The barber says he doubled his account. Even your uncle at the weekend barbecue tells you, you've got to get in on this. Don't miss the chance. You hesitate for a moment, but then you think, this time it's different. But it never is. From tulip bulbs in the 17th century to the dot-com bubble, to crypto, NFTs, and meme stocks in America today, it all follows the same pattern. We laugh at those in the past, the ones who believed a single flower could buy a house. Yet centuries later, we put our faith in lines of digital code on a screen and call it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. What makes intelligent, educated, rational people go mad when they're part of a crowd? Why can an entire society believe in something absurd just because everyone else is cheering for it? Charles Mackay asked that question over 180 years ago, and his book, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and Madness of Crowds, is still telling the very same story, our story, today. Part 1. Humans are not as rational as they think. Charles Mackay begins his book with a harsh truth. Men think in herds. They go mad in herds. And only after the frenzy has passed do they slowly recover their senses, one by one. It sounds cynical, but look around and you'll see he was right. We like to believe we are rational beings, that every investment we make, every product we buy, every belief we hold comes from independent thinking. But Mackay argued, we rarely think at all. We simply react. When we see a crowd running, our first instinct isn't to ask why, it's to ask, should I run too? And so, we run. A study from Stanford University found that when 80% of the people around us believe in the same thing, the part of the brain responsible for independent judgment literally shuts down. In other words, our brains turn off the thinking switch just to belong to the majority. Mackay called this the contagious nature of collective belief. A belief doesn't need logic. It just needs to be repeated enough times to become truth. You can see it everywhere. In finance, when people pour money into a coin they don't even understand. In startups, when everyone claims AI will change everything, and a flood of companies rush to chase the trend. In everyday life, when someone shows off a new car and suddenly ours feels outdated. We call it inspiration, but often it's just the fear of being left behind. What makes Mackay remarkable is that he didn't judge people for this. He saw in it something deeply human. We cannot bear the loneliness of reason, so we seek the comfort of the crowd. Because in a crowd, if we're wrong and lose money, at least we're not alone. But if we're right and stand apart, we risk becoming an outcast. And for most of us, deep down, it's safer to be wrong together than to be right alone. Think about it. When was the last time you made a decision without checking what everyone else thought? When you chose your career, your city, your first investment, did you truly decide by reason or simply follow the crowd's applause? Charles Mackay didn't write to teach us how to make money. He wrote to remind us, before mastering finance, we must first learn to master our own psychology. Because the crowd will always have its madness, but if you can stay rational while everyone else is losing their minds, you'll be the one still standing when the storm passes.
Part 2. Tulip Mania, when flowers turned into gold. Charles Mackay recounts one of the most absurd episodes in economic history, Tulip Mania. It wasn't just a financial event, it was a mirror reflecting human nature and how easily we lose our minds in the pursuit of quick wealth. In the 17th century, the Netherlands was one of the richest and most civilized nations on earth. Its people were known for discipline, frugality, and logic, the very qualities believed to guard against madness. And yet, a single delicate flower, the tulip would drive the entire country insane. Tulips were first imported from Turkey. At first, they were simply symbols of beauty, cultivated by the wealthy as a refined hobby. But then someone realized that rare tulip bulbs could sell for astonishing prices. And like a spark on dry straw, the fever spread. People began buying not because they loved flowers, but because they believed someone else would pay more tomorrow. In taverns, in markets, and along the narrow streets of Amsterdam, people traded tulips they had never even seen. A single Semper Augustus bulb could be worth as much as a townhouse in the city center. A craftsman could quit his job to become a flower investor. A farmer might sell his entire farm just to buy a contract for a flower that hadn't even bloomed. Mackay wrote, "The madness of crowds spreads faster than any disease. And when greed speaks, reason becomes nothing but a faint whisper." At some point, people stopped asking, "Is this flower beautiful?" and started asking, "Has the price gone up yet?" Aesthetic value was replaced by financial obsession. And when the bubble burst, those who were certain of success lost everything, simply because they couldn't bear the thought of being left behind. 3 centuries later, in America, the story repeated itself, only in a different form. The 1990s brought the dot-com frenzy. People believed that any company with .com in its name was destined to win. Students dropped out to start tech firms. Office workers sold their homes to buy stocks. Then came 2021, the NFT boom. A digital image, something anyone could screenshot, sold for millions of dollars. A student in California sold his old car to buy tokens. An office worker in New York poured his life savings into NFTs because all my friends doubled that money. People said, "This is the future. This is the revolution. This is the chance of a lifetime." And just like the Dutch in 1636, they bought what they didn't understand simply because everyone else was buying. When the market crashed, they didn't just lose money. They lost the belief that they were smarter than the ones before them. Mackay once said, "No one gives a knife to a man who doesn't know how to use it." Tulips, stocks, NFTs, none of them are evil by nature. What makes them dangerous is how people use them, to trade hope for illusion. Behind every financial mania lies the same formula. A new idea that sounds reasonable, a few early winners that make everyone else believe they can win too, and finally, an entire society rushing in, not out of greed, but out of fear of being left out. Americans today no longer trade tulip bulbs, but we still trade illusions. We buy things we don't need, with money we don't have, to impress people we barely know. That is the modern tulip mania, only with new colors and new language. So pause for a moment and ask yourself, the last time you made a financial decision, did you do it because you truly understood the value, or because everyone else was doing it? Because Mackay warned us, the crowd may make you rich for a season, but only reason will keep you rich for a lifetime. When tulips became gold, people lost the ability to tell real from fake, value from illusion. And though 3 centuries have passed, that lesson is still being rewritten every day on Wall Street, on social media, and sometimes within ourselves.
Part 3. The South Sea Bubble, when greed wore the mask of intelligence. If tulip mania proved that people could lose their minds for the sake of beauty, then the South Sea Bubble showed that even the most intelligent minds can go mad when greed disguises itself as reason. In 1720, a new dream swept through England. A company called the South Sea Company promised an exclusive right to trade with South America, a land rumored to be overflowing with gold, silver, and endless opportunity. The company promised enormous profits, and no one wanted to be left behind. Aristocrats, merchants, even politicians, everyone invested. Stock auctions turned into festivals where people drank wine, signed contracts, and dreamed of limitless wealth. Mackay wrote, "Every age has its peculiar folly, some scheme, project, or fantasy into which it plunges, spurred on by the love of gain." The danger, Mackay said, was never ignorance, it was intelligence corrupted by greed. One of the most famous investors of that era was Isaac Newton, the brilliant scientist who could calculate the movement of the planets. He bought South Sea stock early, made a large profit, and sold. But when he saw his friends getting even richer, he couldn't stand being left out and bought back in right at the peak. Months later, the bubble burst. Newton lost nearly his entire fortune. And then he said the words that history will never forget. "I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of men." If we look closely, that story has replayed itself time and time again, especially in modern America. During the dot-com boom of the early 2000s, countless engineers, analysts, and even finance professors from Harvard and MIT, people who understood markets better than anyone, were caught in the illusion that every internet company will become the next Amazon. During the crypto and meme stock frenzy of 2021, young investors called themselves the new financial generation. They believed they were rewriting the rules, but in the end, the only thing they rewrote was the manual for how crowds lead themselves off a cliff. Mackay's lesson goes far deeper than economics. He reminds us, when greed wears the mask of intelligence, it becomes almost invisible. Because no one wants to see themselves as greedy. They want to believe they're analyzing, reasoning, investing wisely. And that is the most dangerous moment. Because we stop following emotion and start using our intellect to justify it. In the modern world, this delusion is far more sophisticated. We have tools, charts, data, artificial intelligence, everything that claims to help us understand the market. But Mackay would still say we're only human. We still panic when the market turns red. We still get euphoric when others get rich. We still think, "I'll get out before it all crashes." But no one ever does. Because once the ship of madness starts to sink, it takes everyone with it. The South Sea bubble ended in ruins. Stocks that had risen tenfold became worthless overnight. Wealthy families were wiped out. Men once hailed as financial geniuses disappeared into silence. And as Mackay wrote, "When the delusion passes, shame takes its place." So look around today. How many times do we invest, spend, or make decisions not because we need to, but because everyone says it's the smart thing to do? How often do we rationalize our greed instead of admitting we're simply afraid of missing out? Mackay's warning still echoes through time. No amount of intelligence can save a man from his own greed. Because in the end, markets don't collapse from lack of information. They collapse because we understand everything except ourselves.
Part 4. When belief turns into delusion. There's something strange about human psychology. We can question the data, but we never doubt our hope. And when enough people believe in something, no matter how irrational, it begins to transform into a kind of collective truth. That's when belief turns into delusion. Charles Mackay called it the madness of crowds. He wasn't only talking about financial bubbles, but also about the contagious spread of false beliefs,
from religious extremism to blind political movements to miracle cures that once made all of Europe believe immortality was within reach. Mackay wrote, "Men, it has been well said, think in herds. It will be seen that they go mad in herds, while they only recover their senses slowly and one by one." What he meant wasn't just about ignorance, it was about how belief itself works. Belief is what binds people together, but when it's inflated beyond reason, it becomes a collective illusion, a force as powerful as religion. You can see this everywhere in modern America. From get-rich-quick movements, where millions believe that simply manifesting or attracting money energy will make them wealthy, to blind investment trends, where people throw thousands of dollars at TikTok gurus because they feel the positive energy. We now live in a society where belief spreads faster than truth, and the more people believe something, the more real it begins to seem. Mackay wrote about how in the 17th century, thousands believed in alchemy, the idea that base metals could be turned into gold. Alchemists were praised as geniuses, funded by kings, and everyone believed they held the eternal key to prosperity. Of course, no one ever made real gold, but that belief sustained thousands of lives for over a century. Sound familiar? Today we have our own versions of alchemy, like AI that makes millionaires in 3 months, or millionaire mindset masterclasses. There's nothing new under the sun, only old illusions wearing modern clothes. The frightening part is, delusion doesn't need logic to survive, only a community. The more people believe, the harder it becomes to question because no one wants to be labeled negative or lacking faith. So instead of investigating, we participate. Instead of doubting, we share. Instead of asking questions, we defend the belief as if it were our own honor. Look at America after 2008. When the financial crisis hit, the belief that a house is the safest investment collapsed. Yet just a decade later, the same dream returned, wrapped in new hashtags. Hashtag financial freedom, hashtag hustle culture, hashtag real estate grind. We still chase the dream of easy wealth, just with a different vocabulary. Mackay would probably laugh if he were alive today, because the internet has become the perfect embodiment of the mad crowd he once described. The only difference now is that the crowd has Wi-Fi. He once asked a chilling question. How many have ruined themselves for the sake of an idea? And when you read that line, it's hard not to wonder, of all the things we believe in today, which are true convictions, and which are merely illusions amplified by the crowd? Because sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't believing the wrong idea, it's never daring to question the one everyone says is right.
Part 5. The Power of Clarity. After every wave of collective madness, what remains is not just the wreckage, but the few who stayed sane enough to see it clearly. Charles Mackay didn't write the madness of crowds to mock humanity. He wrote it to remind us that in every era, there are always those who remain lucid, those who dare to stand at the edge, who ask questions when everyone else is cheering, and who hold on to the truth even when it's unpopular. He wrote, "Men, it has been well said, think in herds. It will be seen that they go mad in herds, but they only recover their senses slowly and one by one. People lose their minds in crowds, but they regain their sanity one by one." Clarity doesn't mean isolating yourself from the world. It means learning to observe it without getting swept away. In today's world, where everything happens in 15 seconds, clarity has become almost an act of rebellion. Because everyone's running, chasing trends, stock prices, positive energy, or financial freedom. But few stop to ask, what am I really chasing? And is this truly my dream, or just a dream of the crowd? Mackay would call those who stop and reflect rare souls, people who are not seduced by applause, because they understand that every crowd eventually disperses and only awareness remains. In America, such people aren't non-existent. They're just rarely mentioned. Like the engineer who left the dot-com bubble in 1999, mocked as a fool by his friends, yet 10 years later, he was the only one who still had his capital. Or the woman who quit her high-paying crypto startup job after realizing the product she was promoting was nothing but vapor. Or the ordinary father who refused to pour his savings into hot stocks and instead invested in his children's education, the only investment that never loses value. These are not people who fight against the world. They simply choose not to go insane with it. Clarity is never loud. It doesn't trend. It doesn't get likes or applause. But it is the foundation of inner freedom. Because when you are clear-minded, you are no longer controlled by fear or greed, the twin forces Mackay called the siblings of every financial mania. In the TikTok era, where financial gurus appear as often as coffee shops, real strength isn't measured by how much advice you consume, but when you know when to stop listening. Because the market can teach you about money, but clarity teaches you about yourself. Think about it. What if, instead of asking, what is everyone investing in, each of us asked, do I actually understand what I'm doing? What if instead of fearing to miss out, we learn to accept that no opportunity is ever the last one? Then wealth would no longer be a race of speed, but a game of awareness. Mackay's lesson hasn't aged a day. To remain calm when others are lost in excitement, that is the rarest form of wisdom. Because in a world where everyone wants to speak, the one who remains silent to observe is the one who still holds the power of choice. And perhaps that's the real difference between the clear-minded and the crowd. The crowd chases the wave. The clear-minded waits for it to recede and then walks forward.
Part 6. When the crowd goes mad, the sane stand alone. There's a sad truth that Charles Mackay understood deeply. Sanity is never celebrated while the madness is still unfolding. The sane always arrive late. They're the ones labeled pessimists, slow, or out of touch. But when the storm finally passes, they're often the only ones still standing. Mackay wrote, "Truth, when discovered, is rarely welcome. It is seen as a threat to those who profit from illusion." In every wave of collective frenzy, there's always someone standing on the outside, watching the crowd rush in one direction, and quietly asking, if everyone is right, why do I feel so uneasy? That person doesn't preach or persuade. They simply observe, stay silent, and hold on to a quiet conviction that truth doesn't need a majority to exist. But to live that way, you must accept loneliness. Today, in a world where everyone is connected, yet few truly listen, that loneliness feels even heavier. Think of the young man who pulled out of the 2021 crypto craze just before it collapsed. His friends mocked him for lacking faith or not understanding technology. But when the bubble burst, he was the only one left with money in his account. Or the woman who walked away from a multi-level business scheme while everyone around her was blindly chasing the get-rich dream. They called her negative, excluded her from the group. A year later, when the company fell apart, she was the only one not in debt. Loneliness is the price of clarity, but it's also the foundation of freedom. Because only when you dare to step away from the crowd can you finally hear your own voice. Mackay wanted his readers to see that madness isn't just a social phenomenon, it's a personal surrender to the pressure of belonging. People would rather be wrong together than right alone. Because when you're wrong with everyone else, at least you still feel safe. Yet every leap forward in history, from Galileo and Newton to American icons like Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, and Warren Buffett, began with someone who dared to be different. They were mocked, doubted, even isolated. But it was precisely because they stayed calm amid collective hysteria that they found opportunity where others saw chaos. Somewhere in America today, there might be someone turning off their screen, stepping away from endless debates, just to sit quietly, read a book, and think about their own life. That person may not realize it, but in that very moment, they're doing the rarest thing a modern human can do: staying sane in a world gone mad. The wise are few, because wisdom demands solitude. When the crowd goes mad, the sane don't try to shout louder. They simply walk away. And in that silence, they rediscover themselves. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight the world, but to stay still while the world runs wild. Sanity is not a destination. It's a daily choice. To see clearly while others dream. To slow down while the world rushes forward. Charles Mackay reminds us, every crowd eventually fades, but those who stay rational amid the madness are the ones who remain truly free. Warren Buffett once said, "Rule number 1, never lose money. Rule number 2, never forget rule number 1. But look closer. Losing money isn't just about dollars. It's about losing your clarity, losing your ability to think for yourself. Because once you lose that, everything else will follow. So hold on to your sanity, not just to protect your wealth, but to protect yourself.